Hey sweet friends, I'm Rachel and this is Rock City Cookies. Today we are going to be talking about a Princess Swan first birthday themed cookie set that I made for a precious little girl named Amelia. Now since Amelia was turning 1, we did have a number 1 cookie in this set. We also had a tutu, we had a swan, we had a birthday plaque that said happy birthday on it, and then we also had a scalloped heart with her name on it. This design set only had 3 colors, which made it easier for me on the beginning. On the prep side, I only had to make pink and white. And then we used gold to paint on some accents. I'm only going to be talking today about one design in this set, and I decided to talk to you about the number 1 cookie because there are a few techniques in it that make it a little bit more complicated, and I wanted to talk you through them. So without further ado, let's get going. Welcome to Rock City Cookies, where we talk about all things cookies. If you're new to the channel, hit that subscribe button and click the bell icon to be notified when we upload a new video. Thanks for watching. To begin, let's talk about the fact that this cookie is actually what's called a Franken cookie. So I personally do not have any cookie cutters that have a heart next to the birthday number. I have heart cookies and I have birthday number cookies, but I don't have any that are combined. So what I decided to do when I saw this design online and I knew I wanted to recreate it for this set, I decided to take one of my small hearts and combine it into my number 1 cookie. And when you put them together, it's called a Franken cookie. Think Frankenstein. Now, the way that you always want to do a Franken cookie is you want to take the largest part, whatever cookie is going to be the largest amount, you want to cut out that first out of a full piece of dough. You will place that cookie onto your tray. So in this instance, I would start with a number 1 completely cut out like normal from my frozen dough, and then I would place it onto my baking tray. Whatever design you're wanting to place into your cookie, you first need to cut out that dough from your existing cookie dough. Because I knew that I wanted to add a heart into this shape, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to use my cookie cutter, my heart cookie cutter, and I'm going to actually remove the dough from the number 1 where I'm going to then place more dough for the heart. So with your cookie cutter, just push into your existing dough and remove any dough that you take out that needs to be replaced with the new shape. Now that I have some negative space in my cookie, I'm then going to take my heart cookie cutter and put it into my frozen dough, get the complete heart out of my dough, and then place it into my number 1 cookie. When it's baking, it'll all bake together into one solid shape. Now you can still see here in my completely baked cookie, you can still see the outline of where I placed that heart into the number 1, but I'm going to be covering it with icing, so it doesn't much matter that it's 2 different. You can still distinctly see the 2 different shapes, but it also gives you a great guide to know where your shapes need to go when you're flooding your cookie. So that's why I wanted to show y'all this cookie today, because I want to encourage you, if you don't have a specific cookie cutter that you love, but you also don't want to spend your valuable profits on buying more cookie cutters, this is a fantastic way to make use of what you already own. So now anytime I want to add a heart or a star or any kind of shape or balloons, I have a balloon cutter. So if I wanted to add balloons into a birthday number, I could then combine those two cookie cutters together and come up with a brand new design. So if you have something that'll work, use what you have. It's a little bit extra work, but truthfully, doing this Franken cookie when I already have both designs ready to go, it really doesn't take much longer. It's just cutting out a little bit more, especially when considering I'm not having to buy and store a whole new set of cookie cutters. I can just use what I already have. Now that I've explained how to make this particular design, I want to go ahead and show you how I actually flood this design. The more orders that I have in a week, the more I try to combine steps. And so with this particular design, I knew I needed my heart to be on its own and I needed the 1 to be on its own. I didn't want a wet on wet flood here. I wanted my heart to be distinct. I wanted the number 1 to be distinct, but I also wanted to only do this one time, which means I didn't want to do one section, let it dry under a fan, and then pull it back out and do the other section. I wanted to just get the whole cookie flooded at once. In order to do that, you have to build up icing between the two areas that you're going to be flooding. Now, I don't always recommend this. I definitely think the stronger, the cleaner look is to do 2 different drying times, where you do one side of the cookie once, you dry it, and then you come back and you do the second side. But let's be honest, that's not always practical. Sometimes we just really need to crank out cookies and we just need to get it done. So that is why this time I decided to just build up the barrier between the 2 places where the 2 floods would meet with thick icing. So just go back and forth several times in that area. It doesn't really matter which color you do to build up this area. It just needs to be one of the colors. If you're doing this in 2 different colors, it just needs to be one of them. Obviously, if you're flooding both sections in the same color, it doesn't matter. You can just use the one icing. I chose to use the pink icing to build up that area in between the pink one and the white heart. So while the whole rest of my cookie gets one pass for the outline, that area had several. And remember that thick icing, it needs to be thick enough that if you were to pipe it right next to each other, as you can see, I piped the line over and over and over again on top of each other, and they didn't blend together. My icing didn't just melt together. If it melts together, your outline icing, at least in my opinion, is too thin. You need to thicken it up with some powdered sugar. So take it out of your bag, put powdered sugar in it, thicken it up, get out all the lumps, and then rebag it and then try this again. To flood, I decided to start with the heart first. You can start with either side. It really doesn't matter. When you're flooding, get close to that border line, but not all the way. In order to not accidentally over flood and cause your cookies to blend together like a wet on wet technique, you need to flood close to the line, but not all the way. And then with a scribe tool, a toothpick, a turkey lace, or whatever you use to get out air bubbles in your cookies, with that, just very tenderly pull your icing to the border. That way, your icing line stays intact and your flood icing doesn't overflow that thick icing and lose that definite shape that you're trying to achieve. After I have pushed that icing all the way to my edge, then I'm going to get out any air bubbles, and then I'm just going to right away go ahead and flood the other side of this cookie, which is the pink one. You're going to do the same thing. You're going to flood the whole cookie, but don't get too close to your border between the 2 colors. With your scribe tool, gently pull the icing towards the border between the pink and the white, and then get out any air bubbles. So as you can see, because I did take my time, I didn't overfill those flooded areas. When it goes to dry, you can definitely tell that it's 2 distinct areas, and it didn't lose that definition by doing a wet on wet technique. It actually looks like I came and flooded these 2 areas at 2 totally different times, even though I did not. Whew, thank goodness. It was definitely a time saver for me on this day. Now for the design on top, I wanted to actually write the number 1 on top of the number 1 cookie. So I'm going to use a font. I am so bad about not remembering my fonts. Where's my iPad? Hang on, let me see what the name of this font is. I get asked all the time the names of fonts, and I'm going to be really honest with y'all. I never remember. I have my favorites that I choose. I don't ever write it down. Even though I know that I'm going to get asked that question, I always forget. I talked about this before in other videos. I use the app Fonto to do all of my words, my lettering, my fonts, all of that. I use the app Fonto. And then to project onto my cookies, I use the Camera Lucida app. But let's look at the Fonto app and see if I can remember what I used. So you just click on it on the homepage, and then you click on plain image, and then you click on a white background and the little thing, and you say use this. So this just gives you a white background to be able to put your font onto. So then you just click on your white background and you put add text. I have a whole video coming to you where I literally show all of this with an actual good vision on it, because I know this isn't great to see what I'm doing. But let's see, this is the number 1 or the word 1. It's not going to be capitalized, O-N-E. Okay, so you type what you want. So I typed 1, and then you go to font. And so they have preloaded fonts on here, and then you have any fonts that you have downloaded into here, you've installed from like font.com, or I buy some fonts on fontbundles.com, and there's other places. And so this tends to be where some of my favorite fonts are because I've actually bought them or downloaded them. And then you have a star over here, and the star, when you click on that, that is your favorites. That's the one you've recently used for all your designs. So I tend to go back to this screen the most. So I am sure that this font was on here. So let's try. Yep, that's what it is. Okay, so this font is named FBJB Heart U. Well, that's not very helpful. I'll find it and I'll link it down below, but it looks like heart, like HEARTU. And then I bet JB or FB, I bet that's like the creator's initials. Let's see. That wasn't very helpful. Sorry. Okay, it is FB. FB Heart U. So I'll link it in the description box below, but I don't know if y'all can see that. It says FB Heart U, regular font. So that is the name of the font I used for this set. So it's what I used here for the one, and it's also what I used to write the little girl's name, Amelia, on the other cookie that I have in this set. So anyway, sorry for the long roundabout rant, but that's how you use Fonto, and that's also the font I used. So I'll link it in the description box below. So then I project the font that I chose with the Camera Lucida app. I then project that onto my cookie, and I chose to increase the size of it enough where it covered the whole bottom of the cookie and went into the heart so that it looked really like a cohesive design. I did choose to do that in the pink font, or the pink icing. I did choose to do it in the pink icing. You could do it in the white icing as well, but I knew since the majority of it was going to be on the white heart, I wanted it to stand out a little bit more. So that's why I chose the pink color instead of white on white. Now, after I have done the lettering, I actually am going to let that dry before I move on to the next step. But one of the details that we are going to be putting on top of this cookie are royal icing crown transfers. If you are a member on Patreon, you get all of my royal icing transfers for free. So this is one that is available to you for free. If you are not a member, these are available on my Etsy shop. I'll link it in the description box below. There'll be 5 sizes of these crowns. This is the smallest size. I believe this is the extra small that I'm using for this set. The way that you use royal icing transfers is you print it out on a piece of paper, and then you get a piece of acetate or parchment paper. I prefer acetate, and you place that on top of your piece of paper. I then put both of those onto a clipboard. This allows me to move my transfers around without having to worry about breaking them while they're drying. It gives it a nice flat surface at all times, no matter where I'm working on them. And then after I am done with them, then I can pick up that clipboard, I can move it over to my trays, and then I can put them under a fan to help dry them out faster. When a royal icing transfer is done, it will taste a little bit like a candy because it's just sugar and your flavoring. It's just your icing, but when it hardens up more than it does on just a cookie. So it's not going to be the same texture as your royal icing on your actual cookie. It is going to be harder like a candy. For me, it's kind of like a soft peppermint. So there is a little bit of a crunch to it, but it kind of melts in your mouth too. So when I am doing these crowns, I actually do a row at a time, and I do all of the pointy parts of the crown first, and then I immediately come back on that same row, and then I'll go through and do the bottom parts of the crown, making sure your 2 icings connect. If your new icing, the bottom part of the crown is not touching the dots that you did, when it dries, they won't connect and they'll break. So you want to make sure that either you just do one crown at a time so that all of your icing blends together, or when you go back, you're only doing one row at a time, you're working really quickly, so that when you come back with the next little bit of icing for the bottom of the crown, that you're connecting it all the way to the dot. And then when it dries, it'll all stick together like one whole piece, and your little crown bits won't pop off. Now, my icing is a little bit on the thicker side. This is the same icing that I've been using to outline all of my cookies. I've really tried to avoid doing too many consistencies. So for me, with every set, I make a thick consistency and a flead consistency, and then I call it a day, and I try to get as much done with those 2 consistencies that I can. So with my royal icing transfers, I use the thick consistency, what I use to outline my cookies. That means that when I'm doing the bottom portion of the crown though, that it's not going to smooth out like a flead icing. It will hold its shape. It will definitely look like a crown, but I'm going to have to help it to smooth out. It's okay for me because it's an icing transfer, it's detail. It's okay for me if it doesn't smooth out about 100%. But with my scribe tool, I'm just going to wiggle that icing and really try to get it as smooth as it can. And when you're doing roll icing transfers, there's a couple more things that we need to talk about before we talk about me painting them with this gold. One of the things is that you need to do your roll icing transfers first. Before you decorate, before you flood, before you outline any cookies in your process, you need to do roll icing transfers first because they take the longest to dry. And if you are wanting to have your cookies done quickly, you definitely need to make sure that those transfers are done either first thing in the morning so that you can finish your cookie that evening, or if you even to do these the day before is even better. I really like to have a good 12 hours at least for transfers. For these small transfers, that's all it takes. For bigger transfers, you need to have more time. If it is a rainy day, if it is humid at all, it is going to take your transfers forever to dry. Just trust me on this. I've had so many frustrating transfer experiences on rainy days. It just takes, if there's a lot of humidity in the air, it just takes longer for those transfers to dry. Same with your cookies, but it's less obvious with your cookies than it is with the transfer that you need to move on to your cookie at a specific time. Just highly recommend get those transfers knocked out first as early as you can so that you aren't frustrated later on when you need to use them and they're still not dry. When they are ready to go, they will just pop right off of that acetate with very little effort. And they don't break, and it's a much better process. Okay. Second, figure out how many transfers you need and do several extra, because you will probably have a couple break, depending too on like what amount of detail that you have. If you have a lot of little bits on your transfers, you definitely want to make sure you have plenty of extras in case you have those that break. In this instance, I only had a few break where I just had like a couple of the little dots on the top of the crown. A couple of them didn't stay. They broke off. It was very few, but I still usually try to make lots of extra just in case. And then you can store them. And if you get that order or that design again in the future, you have them in a completely dry container that keeps them safe. They are very shelf stable. They will stay good for months. Or you can just let your kids eat them like candy or whatever, but I definitely recommend doing extra. Now that my transfers have dried, I'm going to paint them gold. And this is the number one reason why I recommend doing these transfers if you have a princess theme and you're having to paint gold or rose gold or any kind of metallic, because painting on top of a cookie is so stressful when you're doing small details, and it takes extra time because you have to be really tedious and you have to use a really small paintbrush because you don't want your gold to spill onto your cookie or anything like that. Whereas when you're doing a transfer and you are able to paint gold directly onto your transfer, you can be as messy as you want. It is glorious. It is freeing. I loved it so much. I wish I could do every bit of like gold detail work on any cookie I ever have. I will do my best to be able to do it in transfer form because it was so fast and so freeing to not have to worry about making a mess. The gold I use is TMP Truly Mad Plastics Super Gold. I have seen lots of other golds out there on the market. You can do whatever you want. There's lots of opinionated people out there on what kind of golds or metals or anything like that you should use in your product. But TMP Super Gold is the one that has never let me down. I absolutely love the gold color. It mixes with a high grain alcohol like a dream, and it's fantastic coverage. It's usually like one coat and I'm good. Again, I'll link it down in the description box below. Do I sound like a broken record? And you just, with a paintbrush, you mix your gold dust with, again, a high grain alcohol, like mega proof alcohol, clear, like an Everclear or really high grain vodka, something along those lines, and you mix it with your gold. I just use my paintbrush. I actually mix it in the lid of my gold. So it comes in a little container. I just dump some of the powder into the lid, and then with my alcohol, I pour some alcohol into the lid and I just mix it together right there so I don't have to dirty up anything else. And then also when the alcohol, which evaporates very quickly, that's why getting a high grain alcohol is so important, that alcohol evaporates off of that. And so then you're just left with just the gold and no liquid at all. Also, that alcohol doesn't interact with your royal icing like water does. If you try to mix your gold with water and then you go to paint onto your cookie, what happens is that water will just eat away at your icing like an acid, whereas the alcohol will dry away really fast and it'll just leave behind the gold. It won't pit your icing, it won't leave it too wet or anything like that. It's a great product. It leaves no taste. So I just highly recommend finding you whatever gold that you prefer, mixing it with high grain alcohol, and then painting it onto the cookies. Now, your icing does have to be dry before you can paint on top of. There have been many times where I have tried to rush this process, and trust me, you don't want to do that. You won't get the same results mixing that gold together on top of wet icing. It really needs to be dry. But once it's dry, then you're able to just paint. And I just flew through these. I just went really quickly, painted all of them. And then even you can tell some of them are so ready to go onto my cookies that even me just painting on them, they're like popping off of the acetate, which is the perfect result. Then you 100% know those transfers are ready for your cookies. I actually was trying to use one of my palette knives to get off these crowns simply because with the gold on them, gold is just messy. It's a dust. So it's messy and it sticks everywhere. In fact, you'll see like as I'm showing you the completed product of most of these cookies, I have like gold residue all on my hand because the gold just gets everywhere, which is totally fine, but just be prepared. So I was trying to get these gold crowns off of the acetate with my palette knife to try to save gold from going on my hands, but getting royal icing transfers off with your hands is just as quick normally as using a palette knife. Sometimes you just need a little bit of something to disconnect that transfer from the acetate. It's ready to go. It just kind of needs some help. So either just like using your fingernail or using a palette knife or your scribe tool just to kind of pop it off, that works too. I place all of these onto a napkin and I set them aside ready for them to go onto my cookies. Now, because I was touching these crowns to be able to put them onto their areas, you may have to do some touch-ups on your crowns after you get them placed, which that you can just paint a little bit more on, or you may not. It's totally up to you, but you just attach your royal icing transfer with just a tiny bit of icing on the back of that transfer and then just place it down and push it gently onto your cookie. And it's like glue. It will stay there like glue. It's fantastic. To finish this cookie, I did want to add a gold splatter. So again, you're using that gold mixture that you used to paint all of those crowns. I like to do all of my gold work at one time. So I didn't paint my crowns until I was ready to splatter my cookies and use all of my gold at once because it's just so messy. You can see it's all over my hands. It gets all over my work desk and all of that. So I like to do all of my gold at once. So I painted all of those crowns and now I'm going to attach the crowns to some of the cookies and then I'm going to splatter them all at the same time. That way, once I'm done, I can go wash my hands, I can clean up my table, and then we can move on with the rest of the cookies. But with your paintbrush in your hand and the gold mixture on the end, so you just dip your paintbrush into your gold mixture, and then I just hit my paintbrush like this, not where the end is. I hit it where the handle is. I just tap it and it splatters gold all over my surface. Some people prefer to use a toothbrush and then they just kind of flick the bristles, and when they flick the bristles it does the splatter. Totally up to you. I just have always done like hitting of the paintbrush handle and it works for me. And plus, if I'm not splattering the toothbrush with my fingers, then it's like less of a mess. I mean, again, it's messy, but it's less of a mess. And that, my friends, is the #1 cookie. So we did a Franken cookie, we did gold crown royal icing transfers, and we did a gold splatter. So I think that was a pretty productive day. The rest of these designs will be available to watch on Patreon or YouTube membership. Don't forget the royal icing transfers are available for members as well, or you can grab them on Etsy. And I will see you guys next week with a totally new theme. Thanks so much for watching. See you then. Bye-bye.